be able to be joined by Adam from Stockport. Adam's going to talk to us about MS Forms and Power Automate, if that's all right to hand over to you, Adam. Welcome.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So just a bit about me. I'm Adam Pinder. I'm the financial reporting developer here at Stockport, which is a job title I came up with. I've been working at Stepping Hill Hospital since 2002. I started as an apprentice at the age of 16, so I've been here 22 years. And across that time, I've done a lot of sort of projects, sort of automating processes using VBA and improving the way we work and changing our processes so we can work more efficiently. And it's only been in the last few years that I've actually started dabbling with some of the more traditional, some of these newer sort of automation tools. And I've been thinking a lot about how information flows into our department and out of it. And so I just wanted to sort of take you through this journey that we went on, sort of automating this process. So it was quite a simple process, really, and it was all the requesting new cost center and account codes and subjective codes and getting them set up in our finance system. So can you see my screen? Does it come up?
We can. Lovely slide.
Fantastic. Thank you. Copilot came up with that. So here at Stockport, just give you some information. So we're a medium-sized DGH, annual budget of 440 million, budgeted workforce of 6,000 whole times, and we analysed these costs over 800 cost centres, and we analysed the spend over 1,200 subjective codes. And on average, over the past 2 years, we've had 5 new cost centres or subjective codes requested to be set up. So we're quite flexible in our finance system that we do allow new things to be set up. I know some trusts have it a bit more locked down, a bit more fixed, but we're quite flexible here at Stockport. So where were we? So it was all paper-based. The forms were, so when I first started, and sorry, 1 second, I need to get. So yeah, so we're all paper-based initially, and we had physical signatures on there, and request forms were then, once they were signed off and set up, they were put in a ring binder. And so after a few years, we decided we should automate this process. And this is before Power Automate, before Office 365 and all this. Our attempts were to automate this process. Email a spreadsheet template for approval, inserting pictures of signatures into spreadsheets, printing off the signed spreadsheet forms to then be put in a ring binder again. So I'm sure we can all relate to how things used to be like that. So what changed? So COVID and lockdown happened. We weren't in the office, so nobody could actually physically sign these forms. The communication was all through email inboxes were getting full up, and things were being missed. We then got Office 365. So I had some new functionality to play with. We were fortunate that we were one of the early adopters in our trust, and IT gave us carte blanche to have a go, and they didn't lock anything down, and they said, just see what you can do. So and they were really supportive and sort of encouraged us to try things out. Fortunately, I'm quite techie, and I was able to sort of see the potential in some of these new tools that were sort of being offered. And I felt that setting up new cost centres, this is a simple process that actually should be quite easy to automate, and it will be an ideal proof of concept. So then I can then get buy-in from others. So what did we do? So first off, I started off with the Microsoft Forms template. and I designed an input form. So very similar to what we were previously doing with our spreadsheet forms, similar formats. So I generated that in Microsoft Forms, used lots of drop downs in there. So then we can then fix what they could have in there. So on a spreadsheet, you could type anything into it and it would quite often be wrong. So we were able to sort of build some data validation into it so we were able to use these drop downs. And also I was able to use the branching function in Microsoft Forms, which is really a very good tool in there, which allows you to have different drop downs depending on what based on previous entry, and I'll show you that later on. Then we went and started looking at Power Automate. So when dealing with Power Automate, it's about triggers, and we've looked at stuff already this morning, which is sort of manual triggers, and I think it was Jamie also gave a demonstration of the trigger being from a form being submitted, which is what we used in this scenario. So we used the submission of the form as a trigger to start this flow, and then we used multiple approval steps in our flow. So it went via different individuals, which I'll talk through in the example later. But we're able to sort of have this multiple step approval process. And then we were able to then generate, based on the final outcomes, we were then able to generate an email back to the requester to tell them whether it had been approved or rejected and the reasons why. So demonstration, right here. So let me change screen. Bear with me, please. Stop share. I think it's screen 2. No, that's not the right one. On that one. Sorry.
Stop it's all right. Share. We love live demos and we understand how they go. Don't worry. All good.
Why is it not letting me stop sharing? I made a note which screen was which, and it's just changed it for some reason.
Oh, of course it does. Why wouldn't it? Just makes it difficult for you.
Yeah. So I'll go with this one, see whether this one comes up right. Yeah, this one looks like it's coming up right. And so wait for that to disappear. Thank you. Right, so this is the original form that we had, where we've got to choose. You've got to choose what you want, and then free text and other boxes for reporting hierarchies and different. So, for instance, if it's a pay code, then it would need these items ticking so that it could be then set up correctly in the finance system. So our form looks like this. So again, so where they would put in there the account code that they want setting up, the description, reason, all free text. But then this is when we start getting to some of the drop downs and some of the branching functionality. So with I&E category, you've got our different I&E categories. So if, for instance, if I chose other income, it would then allow me to, it's got more questions for me to answer. So account rules and other referencing that we'll need to put in. But if I change this to, for instance, to show as pay costs, I've got different questions for it to ask. So that branching functionality, so then I can then go into, well, it's consultants and it's bank staff, and now we'll get my other questions here. So it's all that, it makes it easier for the end user to actually to populate, and so it just makes life a lot easier. And then at the end, they hit submit. So if I go on to the flow, let's just move this. So just bear with while it loads. It's one of the things it is annoying with Power Automate and some of these web forms these days, that it can just take that extra time to load up when it's web-based. So you just look and edit. So this is the sort of the back end of what you've seen already, what Jamie was talking us through and gave us a demonstration of, where when a new response is submitted, get the response details. I've got some extra things in here. So first off, based on our reporting hierarchy, there's a specific reference that we need to generate for our finance systems manager to put in the system to state what part of the relationship hierarchy it needs to go into. So it calculates this, so it has this functionality of being able to do calculations, and it's looks horrible in here, but actually it is simple realistically, but it's able to sort of join together different data, different entry points to actually then concatenate stuff together and do some calculations within the flow. We start an approval process. So we're starting this approval process here, which it comes to myself for me to review. And as part of that, it's pulling through the contents of the form into this approval process. And this is an approval process that's built into Microsoft Teams. So it's pulling that information out of the request and putting it into a format that's quite nice to look at. And it comes through with me on here to approve or reject. So it comes through to myself. I'm reviewing it. I'm not the one setting it up in the system, but I'm reviewing it to go, yeah, I agree. That makes sense from a financial management point of view, and it sits in our reporting hierarchies in that way. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So this is where it's generating that form there. So then if I hit yes, I agree with it, it starts the second approval process, which is then going to our systems team, and it's the first to respond here. We can choose it that everybody must approve or first to respond, and also you can do custom responses as well as part of that. And again, they've got it set up in there, and they've got this extra field on here that was calculated earlier on in the flow, so that it's relevant, because that's the bit that's relevant for them setting up this new cost center. So we came across an issue which I think was brought up in the chat over the break. I think, where was it now? It was, I think it was from George. I think it was. Yeah. So George Bentley says, general question: does anyone else's Microsoft 365 have access to Outlook? Because I've just checked mine and it does not. Our IT department have advised it's the same for our entire trust. So it might limit my ability to make a connection with Power Automate. So we had this issue as well. And what it is, it's where your email is hosted. Is it hosted on a Microsoft Exchange server under the Microsoft cloud, or is it being hosted on site on premise? So we had this issue where we couldn't connect our emails to Power Automate. So we then had to do some research and do some Googling, and we found out that you could actually get SharePoint to send an email. So we have these here, these send an HTTP request to SharePoint. So these are all emails that are being generated by SharePoint back to the original user. And in here, it gets a bit complicated. It's got to be in a JSON format, but it actually allows you to create custom messages and pull information in from information submitted in the previous requests and generates custom emails in this JSON format, which then can then be sent back to the original user. So the original user doesn't need to be signed into Microsoft Teams if they don't have that installed, for instance. It can all be done via email. And it doesn't matter whether their email is hosted in the Microsoft Cloud or on-premise. So that's one way of getting around that. So these are all of our flows in here. So that it's simple compared to some of the other automations we've seen, but this is an effective one. That's sort of a clear process, but when you break it down into these different steps, it is complicated, but not overly complicated. So we have then, yes, click cancel on that one. So we have now got this audit history as well with this now. So it logs it within Power Automate, and under the approvals, it's got it in here. So got the history of the flows are all built into the system. So we can go back in time and go and see earlier ones and see requests going back to the beginning. And also we have a file which is saved in the cloud on the SharePoint, where it's got exactly when things were when forms were submitted, who by, and what the contents of what those different requests are. And we've got that full visibility of what's been requested and what's coming through this process. So let's stop sharing for that one at the moment. And let's go back to my presentation. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. So what were the outcomes? So code was created a lot quicker. So because there wasn't emails flying around trying to dig into those emails and find the forms and then sign them off with copy and pasting of images of signatures and then forwarding it on to somebody else. It's a lot more slicker. And also I can sign it off on my phone. I'm signing it onto Teams on there. It pops up. I can look at it and go, yeah, that looks sensible, approve, and it goes on to the next stage, nice and easily. So things we were doing things in a much more quicker, proactive way. There was less paper and less emails flowing around the system. We had that full audit or history of all the requests and the approvals and why things were rejected, and there was more instant feedback. People are now more comfortable and confident in using Office 365. I've got colleagues now setting up forms, not with any automation with them, but actually creating these forms and sharing them and getting, like, for instance, we provide some training, and all of our feedback forms are on there now, and there is more sort of buy-in for using some of these newer tools that we haven't traditionally used in the past, and it's there available under our license. So let's just go out there and use it, and it makes things a lot easier to get information And there's also an appetite to automate more processes. Now that we've seen this, we can see what the potential is, and that proof of concept has worked, and we've got more buy-in from sort of like senior finance leadership and others in the organization have seen the potential of it and trying to sort of share that that good practice to go, actually, this is what we can do. Costs us no extra money. Let's try and use it. What other things can we do? So the challenges. It was, yeah, whether your emails are hosted on premise or in the cloud, it does make a difference. Yeah, and also where your files are stored. Are they stored on a local network or are they in SharePoint on OneDrive? Because if it's on OneDrive, you can then share it and use it more effectively. But if it's on premise on a shared local network, you can't connect to it as easily. Things are hard coded. It's not always easy to update, and it can be daunting to non-technical people. So it's hard, those processes are hard coded to flow to me and to flow to my colleagues in the systems team. If I was to leave, then we'll have to then go in and manually change those flows. So we have documented how to make those changes, but since we created the flows in Power Automate, it's actually changed. Microsoft have updated it, and the look and format of it is slightly different. So our screenshots that we had previously are no longer relevant. So we'll need to also bear in mind actually keeping that up to date. Some of our documentation, it's not just to set it once and go. Oh, sorry, the light's just gone off in here. I've not moved enough. That's better. So some of it is hard coded. You might be able to do some fancy things with dynamic lists and things, but that's a bit above me at this moment. But yeah, and it can be daunting to people that are not familiar with this software. What I've shown you here is web-based. Obviously, we know there's the Power Automate desktop, but for Power Automate for these instant flows and for the forms and other sort of some of the other functionality, newer functionality in Office 365, it's web-based under our licenses generally, and that can come with limitations and can cause a few issues, and it be a bit slow. It's not as responsive, and it's also getting used to just working out of a web browser. It's a different mentality that you have to think about sometimes. In this scenario, you can't edit the request while it's in the authorization workflow. I've had numerous times where I just wanted to make a slight tweak to what somebody's inputted, and I've had to reject it for them to resubmit properly or resubmit correctly. And it could have been just a slight change, but I couldn't actually, in this workflow, I couldn't actually make changes myself. It had to be a reject and start again. Using an apostrophe in a narrative can occasionally break things. When having to use the JSON format for the HTTP request for SharePoint to send out the email, there's a lot of apostrophes in there, and it uses that as part of the structure of the data. And if you have an extra apostrophe in there, it breaks, and it's because it thinks that it's entered a text and it's starting to go into another function. So it's to bear in mind, if you are having to use an apostrophe, if in an import, you might need to cleanse it before it goes any further, or just not use them. So for instance, if I put an apostrophe in the rejection or the approval and put a comment in there, it would then, if you put an apostrophe, it would just break the flow because it thought it was needing to do something else. So it's just bear in mind if it's one of those characters that can occasionally break things. So any questions at this point?
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. There's a few in the chat actually, yeah. So Nina's asked, do you think there is potential to add the MS form for new cost centers and subjectives to the end of an existing report process? So such as the GRI.
So this is based on user input. So this is based on an individual wants something setting up. So it's putting that initial request in. It's not actually coming from a different system or a different data source. This is a process that is coming from an individual wanting something new, setting up.
Yeah.
If it was if you were wanting to so with this process, it's using the Microsoft Forms, and I don't think you could also populate the contents of a Microsoft form.
I don't think you could. I mean, I bet you could, but yeah.
You probably could.
Yeah,
but it's the actual that wouldn't be the appropriate process.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the appropriate tool to use in that scenario.
Yeah, I agree.
And
so we have a question from Paula as well. So how have you set up the forms in Teams in terms of users? So setting up yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I designed the form as an individual, and then I was able to pass that form onto a SharePoint group to be the owner. So everybody in that SharePoint group can use that form. And we put links to that form on our SharePoint site, so which is again within that same SharePoint group. And also those flows, I was able to transfer ownership over to that SharePoint group as well. So then it all then is now, even though I set it up and designed it, it's actually owned by the SharePoint group. So then everybody who's got the relevant access in that SharePoint group can actually edit that flow and see that, and it makes it all just work. And that's that future proofing of if I ever get run over by a bus type mentality. It's all access is there. You don't have to worry about sort of getting user access set up or changed. So you prototype under yourself, and then once it's ready for publication, putting it into a into a group that other people are in. Does that answer the question?
Brilliant. I think it does. Yeah. That's great. I can't see any more questions, Adam.
Are the drop downs for expenses type manually typed in or lookup? So yes. This is a limitation, to be honest. So the drop downs are manually typed in. So when we've changed things, we've had to manually go in and rechange those things again. They're not dynamically linked to something else. Okay, so that's within Microsoft Forms. That is a limitation of that system. If it's a set once, and then if your business logic changes or hierarchies change and all that, or different reporting categories are needed, you need to go back and manually change it. Okay. I am looking at which is really my next slide, which I'll just talk about now. So I'm looking at now using Microsoft Lists, which has more dynamic elements to it, which also allows for editing the requests while they're in a workflow. It's not just a snapshot and then that's what gets carried through the entire process. You can actually build in pauses into that depending on how your workflow is set up. And so I'm experimenting more with lists to then actually have it so you're just changing it in one place, then that could then propagate through to other things. And I think eventually I will be moving on to Power Apps. I've just not built up the courage yet to actually to learn that yet. But that is probably the direction of Flow. So at the moment we are prototyping a new process for our cost saving schemes and how that is logged and authorized in the organization. So if I just, can I just drag that across rather than stopping and sharing screens? Yeah. So this is our sort of process map for what we're doing for the, can I zoom in? This is the process map for doing our step for our cost saving program, where we want different individuals, non-finance people. So we're involving the executive directors as well as divisional leadership and a lot more different outcomes and different scenarios to come into play, and informing different people at different stages. So there's a lot more complications to this process, but this is what we're currently sort of developing at the moment and prototyping. And this is what we're using this based on, not on Microsoft Forms, but on Microsoft Lists, which then we're building then triggers based on different input boxes at different points and validating some of those things so that we can have a lot more complicated process, which hopefully we'll be able to bring to you next year once we've got it up and running. Hopefully you'll invite me back. So this is where it can be quite a powerful tool to actually then to flow these things around our organization. And it's things that potentially could change quite a lot, but it should be quite straightforward to update your input forms down the road. Because we all know we set something up and then 6 months later you want to add something else to that form. A few months later afterwards, or we want to make a tweak here. And it's all within our gift to actually change these things and update them and make it work for what we want it to do. And it can be it can be quite reactive to actually what the business need is.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Adam. I think that's a really good step-by-step explanation of how you get from papers in a drawer all the way to full scale, automating that whole process. And that's an exciting next step as well. I've dabbled my toes in lists, and the possibilities with that is quite endless. So I encourage you to run in there and see what you can break or make work for you.
Yeah, and there's I subscribe to quite a few tech things on YouTube and some of the Mr. Excel and things like that. But they've sort of like talked about how people use spreadsheets incorrectly. And realistically, these days we should be using databases, but then SQL databases are too complicated sometimes and are too large scale. The small scale databases that we need to be using, and that we use Excel as a database. But it looks like Microsoft Lists is that interim database that we can store data in it in a structured way that actually can be then because it's in that Office 365, it integrates with Power Automate and I think Power Apps as well and other things.
So, yeah. I think it's a good feeder, isn't it? So if anyone's doing some fun stuff with lists, please do get in touch or fill in the form we are badgering you with in the feed, because I think that would be really useful. It's a missing link in a way.
It is, yeah, because obviously the large scale RPA sort of with bots and everything, it's good for transactional or transforming data, but actually how we actually get that, some of that smaller data sets
Yeah,
and the sort of from things from a human rather than from a system, and how we can actually collate that data is through things like forms and Microsoft Lists, because Microsoft Lists, once you've set it up, you can easily, it automatically designs a form as well for an inputting into it. So there's a lot of scope there.
absolutely. Adam, thank you so much. That's been really, really helpful. And really good to see how you're getting on. And of course, you're welcome back next year and any time. Want to hear how you get on, because I think, yeah, we're all on different stages of a journey, but sharing that I think is going to help everyone all the way around. So yeah, really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right.